Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
I'm Chris.
And today we're going back to April 14, 1865, and the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And we're going to be looking at an event or a decision that actually saved the life of one Ulysses S. Grant.
Yeah, this is one of the most well-known stories in history by just about anybody who knows anything about history. But once again, there is so much mystery and speculation and just wondering. This is kind of that, well, what if such and such would have happened? Would the results have been different? And I like this topic because it's not just about Ford's Theater. It's not just about Grant and Lincoln, but there's other people that are involved in this, which really sways kind of how it goes. And so, I remember I was reading a book on Grant, and Grant has a very unique history. And this story just kind of popped up. The what if Grant had gone to Ford's Theater that night? Would history, dare you say, would United States history, would our history look different, be different, or would it have been the same? It's a great what if, but it's full of just fascinating turns and twists, and it just causes us to just take a few moments and look at it.
Yeah, and what happens here is, of course, our listeners probably know Abraham Lincoln, April 14, 1865. He and his wife, Mary Todd, they have tickets to a show at Ford's Theater. Show's called My American Cousin. And they reach out to Ulysses Grant and his wife, Julia, and invite them to the show. And apparently, Chris, it's my understanding, even though Lincoln and I guess Grant got along okay, I don't know much about the history between the two of those men. Their wives did not get along. So when the invitation came, Ulysses Grant and Julia turned the invitation down not to go to Ford's Theater that night.
I think that this is a classic version of Real Housewives of Washington, D.C. Because when you think about this, Mary Todd Lincoln is just an absolute study just in general, but the animosity, it might be a strong word, but there was some very awkward and tense moments between Mary Todd and Julia. And we don't know why they turned it down. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of things. Grant wanted to go visit the family, and maybe they leave early to go up to New Jersey, and therefore, hey, sorry to decline, just not going to make it happen. I'm a general in an army. I'm tired. I'm going up to see the family. Or this is the spicy part, the
Yeah.
sauciness that kind of comes
Yes.
into it, is that there's more to it than that. And I remember reading in this book, it was talking about something that happened in March 1865. And it was kind of near the end of the Civil War and General Grant's headquarters. And it just so happened that Julia is there and Mary Todd is there. And I don't know how it happened, but when Mary Todd shows up, she saw Julia, Grant's wife, riding in a carriage with Abraham Lincoln. And Mary, who had some disorders that were going on,
Some
she just really just flies off the handle on this and says, "Okay, first of all, what are you doing with my man?" And she basically questions him angrily and says, who do you think you, I mean, and it was very public. And in this moment, you've got soldiers, you've got other people that are witnessing the first lady of the United States, the first general's wife that are having this, dare I say, cat fight. And it was just an extreme tension. And we know, if we look at it, that Mary Todd, she had a reputation for being very sensitive about her husband. And she didn't like women hanging around Abraham Lincoln. And, Julia was kind of like, I'm just talking to the guy. What's the big deal about that? And to the point where Julia really didn't want to be around Mary Todd because she felt that she was just awkward and weird, and she just didn't like it. She was very uneasy and due to her moods or whatever. So she just tells her husband, listen, I'd rather go up to New Jersey and be with the family instead of dealing with her. No telling what she might do.
Yeah. Yeah, and they had other run-ins as well. It's my understanding that there was snippy comments coming from both sides anytime the two women were together. Now, of course, going to the theater is supposed to be a relaxing event, and I suppose the Lincolns were going, the war is over. Yes, they know they're going to have some difficult times ahead trying to reconstruct the nation after secession and after the war, but they had no way of really knowing that the events of that night were going to unfold the way they did. Now, while the Lincolns and the Grants are dealing with their plans of what they were going to do that night, there were several men who were involved in a cabal to now kill President Abraham Lincoln. Now, the original plan, Chris, as you know, was to kidnap Lincoln, and then it moved to killing Lincoln. And the head of this cabal was, of course, John Wilkes Booth. And on this particular night, John Wilkes Booth was going to go to Ford's Theater and kill President Lincoln. At the same time, Lewis Powell, one of his collaborators, was going to kill Secretary of State William Seward, and David Azarot was going to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson. So there was a big cabal to commit a major assassination event on that night. And if Ulysses S. Grant had gone to the theater on that night, he may have ended up being part of the he may have ended up being part of the targets that John Wilkes Booth would have targeted, or Chris, he was a general. Maybe he could have done something that would have prevented it from happening to begin with.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing is that you have Grant, who is the Union's top general, and he's very security conscious because he knows that he's the number one guy in the army. If they can get the number one guy, then the army probably fails. And so I'm
Mhm.
pretty confident that Grant had more security than Lincoln did. I mean, Lincoln had that one bodyguard. Well, Grant, always aware, had multiple guards. And even if it would have just been one guard, let's say with Grant, you now have two guards that are there at that night. There's probably going to be more security that's there.
Yeah, yeah, and what happened with Lincoln's bodyguard?
Well, he got distracted
Yeah, he went to the bar.
and decided that somebody was going to offer him a drink, and he'd go
Yeah.
down there and have a drink. And the other thing that I kind of goes with this, I think this is just me. If Booth would have known that Grant was in the box with Lincoln, I wonder if Booth wouldn't have had second thoughts. And second thoughts could have been two things. Maybe he decides to go for Grant first, which makes an even bigger statement because then you have a good chance of the North, the Union losing the war. Or maybe he trains his thoughts on just abandoning it all together and saying let's get everybody together and come up with something different. So there's a big what if it might happen because just the presence of Grant in that place could have changed the course of history. Or maybe Grant would have done what who was it the I don't remember the guy's name that jumped in the way for Ronald Reagan's would-be assassin, John Hinckley, and took the bullet. I mean, Reagan still got shot, but he basically took a bullet for him. So
Mhm.
I think it doesn't guarantee that there's a different outcome, but it allows for a what if, and I think that it changes the dynamics of what it is that happens.
Yeah, one of the things when I talk about the Lincoln assassination in class, and Chris, you may have seen this, you may have had the same experience. Students will often ask, well, where was the Secret Service? Where was his presidential guards? And the answer is he had won at this place and he was down drinking at the bar instead of being where he was. The Secret Service was originally designed and created for counterfeit money, not necessarily protecting the president. And after Abraham Lincoln's assassination on April 1865, they didn't really do much to beef up presidential security. So in 1881, you have James Garfield who shot at a train station, and he didn't have any real security either, because they had thought that this was just, Lincoln's assassination was a one-off, maybe connected to the war or whatever, and we don't really have to worry that much about it anymore. Because if you look at it, they had gone through George Washington all the way to Abraham Lincoln, the 16 presidents, and only one had been killed. This is just an accident. This is just a bad happenstance. But of course, unfortunately, in presidential history, we see that assumption was wrong.
And the other thing that I kind of go along to that makes me wonder, let's say that Grant goes, and Grant's unable to do anything about it, and Lincoln gets shot, and Lincoln is assassinated, but Grant lives. I am pretty confident that in that day, at that moment, that the eyes of the Union would have seen Grant being in the box, and Grant would have probably become the most stabilizing figure in the Union because the general is there. And that possibly his leadership would have come earlier. You remember after Lincoln is assassinated, you've got Andrew Johnson that comes into power, and there's the impeachment, there's the craziness that goes on. Andrew Johnson creates just a multitude of different problems, but maybe Grant, instead of later becoming that stabilizing figure, it's earlier that he becomes, and just maybe since he pushes for civil right protections in his presidency, maybe he pushes those a little earlier, and we don't have as much of the racial issues that we have in the South. We don't know, but what I do know is that if Grant would have been there, it significantly increases the odds that the attack might have been stopped. Booth could have been stopped a whole lot earlier. They could have found him then and there because Grant's people would have been there. Um, I don't know. History could have turned on a dime if something would have happened and Grant would
Yeah,
have been there.
yeah, I think the question you're really getting at is if Reconstruction had been successful in
Yeah.
another, in what you're talking about, is a scenario in which it would have sort of looked very different. If Reconstruction had been successful, how would American history have changed? Would we have needed a civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s? If civil rights had been gained, in the late 1860s, and you didn't need the civil rights movement in the 1960s, how would American history have looked different? How would race relations in the country look different?
And the reality, though, is it's just a fascinating what if.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's something that, makes for a good podcast topic. It
Yeah.
makes, and I'll go back once again. This is the beauty of history. We've said this over and over before, but we know that math is what math is. It's not going to change. But history allows for these conversations, and it's exciting because it just lets you see that every decision that is made, every movement makes a difference. You go look at Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson survives impeachment and conviction by one vote. He
Yep.
he survives that. So that shows you that not everybody was on board with that Reconstruction effort of Johnson. And that if Grant would have been there, Grant could have immediately taken charge in the investigation, in the capture, in the hey, here I am. I am here. Let me stand up and address the nation at that moment. So it's just, I don't know, it's what makes me love history.
Yeah, and we did an episode on the impeachment. I think we did two episodes on the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. So if our listeners want to go back and listen to that episode, just go to YouTube and type in Andrew Johnson. There is one thing, Chris, that I found when doing some research for this episode, and I had to go do a little digging to see if it was true because I read conflicting accounts of how true it was. That night, the night of April 14, 1865, or that evening before Lincoln's assassination, Julia Grant and her husband Ulysses Grant are leaving town in their carriage. And as they're going about, they're moving down Pennsylvania Avenue. A rider and a horse I believe it was a darker horse, sort of comes up beside them and glares at them and then rides off. And it was something that uh, I think for a while was sort of questioned. But Julia Grant wrote about this, and I don't like reading on here, but I'm going to read it. Is that okay? Um, she says, quote, after as General Grant and I rode to the depot, this same dark, pale man rode past us at a sweeping gallop on a dark horse, black, I think. He rode 20 yards ahead of us, wheeled and returned, and as he passed us both going and returning, he thrust his face quite near the General Grant and glared in a disagreeable manner. Miss General Rucker, Daniel Rucker's wife, in whose carriage we were, remarked, General, everyone wants to see you. Yes, General, the General Grant replied, but I do not care for such glances. Those are not friendly at the least. I noticed the general draw back as the man returned and came so close. And there are people who believe that that was John Wilkes Booth.
And that is just another amazing coincidence of how history intersects with various things. Just ordinary passerby, right? That ultimately changes the course of history.
Yeah. And you know, one the other thing I learned, now this gets into, here you go, Chris. This gets into trivia. No ghosts, don't worry about it.
Thank you.
Gets into trivia. Did you know that John Wilkes Booth's father, a guy called Junius, had actually written a letter in 1835 threatening to kill Andrew Jackson?
Doesn't fall far from the tree.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Well, Chris, thanks for another great episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I hope our listeners enjoyed this episode. If you did enjoy it, please share it with your family and friends. Give us a like on YouTube. Follow us on YouTube. Subscribe. Follow us on Spotify. Share, like, whatever you could do to help the podcast keep going. Until next time, I'm Ray,
I'm Chris.
and we'll talk at you later.